There was a time when a dream called Yugoslavia stood at the crossroads of Europe. Born from the ashes of war, it was a land of mountains and rivers, of cultures intertwined, of promises whispered in the language of unity. But dreams can break, and when this dream shattered, it shook the world. Welcome to Empires Unearthed, where we bring forgotten histories and the rise and fall of great nations back to life. Today, we uncover the story of Yugoslavia, a nation created with hope, torn apart by hatred, and remembered in blood and ashes. This is not just a history lesson. It is the story of identity, ambition, and the dangers of division. A story that began in 1918 and ended in fire almost a century later. Join us as we journey through the rise and fall of Yugoslavia, a complete history. The year was 1918. The First World War had ended, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the empire that had dominated Central Europe for centuries, lay in ruins. Across its shattered provinces, nations emerged like seeds breaking through the earth. Among them was a bold idea to unite the South Slavs, Serbs, Croats, Slovenians, and others into one single state. This dream became reality on December 1, 1918, when the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes was born. It would later be known simply as Yugoslavia, meaning Land of the South Slavs. At first glance, this new kingdom seemed like a miracle, a beacon of unity after the horrors of war. But beneath the surface, fault lines were already forming. Ethnic and religious tensions. The kingdom was a mosaic of peoples: Orthodox Serbs, Catholic Croats, Muslim Bosniaks, Slovenians, Macedonians, Montenegrins. They spoke different languages, practiced different religions, and carried centuries of history, some of it soaked in blood. Instead of binding them together, these differences often pulled them apart. Who would lead this new country? Who would hold power? Serbian dominance and Croat resentment. From the beginning, Serbia, which had fought victoriously in World War I, saw itself as the natural leader of Yugoslavia. The Serbian royal family, the Karađorđević dynasty, ruled the kingdom. But to Croats and Slovenes, this felt less like unity and more like domination. In parliament, debates turned into shouting matches. Croat leaders demanded more autonomy. Serbs insisted on centralization. The dream of unity was already cracking. Economic struggles. The new country also faced staggering economic challenges. War had left the land scarred. Industry was weak. Agriculture was backward. While the north, Slovenia and Croatia, was more developed, the south lagged far behind. Poverty and unemployment became constant shadows. And then came assassination, a word that would haunt Yugoslavia's history. The 1928 assassination in Parliament. On June 20th, 1928, during a heated parliamentary session, a Serbian deputy opened fire on Croatian representatives. Stjepan Radić, a leading Croat politician, was mortally wounded. The shockwave from this act tore through the fragile kingdom. Croats saw it as proof of Serbian aggression. Serbs saw Croat protests as betrayal. The dream of harmony was bleeding. The king strikes back. In January 1929, King Alexander I decided enough was enough. He abolished the constitution, dissolved parliament, and established a royal dictatorship. The kingdom was renamed the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. Alexander believed only strong central power could hold the nation together, but his move crushed democracy and deepened resentment. In the shadows, separatists began to plot. Among them were Croatian nationalists who would later form Ustasi, a name that would stain Yugoslavia in blood. As the 1930s unfolded, tensions smoldered like embers. The world outside was also changing. A storm was coming, a storm called World War II. And when it struck, Yugoslavia would become a battlefield of nations, ideologies, and vengeance. The 1930s were a decade of turmoil for the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. King Alexander's attempt to crush division with absolute power only deepened the cracks. Political freedom was gone, but resentment remained. Ethnic rivalries didn't disappear. They went underground, waiting for the right moment to explode. Alexander's dictatorship. King Alexander I believed that a strong monarchy was the only way to preserve unity. He banned political parties, dissolved parliament, and introduced a new name, Yugoslavia. The king even changed the country's internal map, dividing it into provinces called Banovinas to weaken regional identities. But authoritarian rule could not erase centuries of mistrust. Croats accused Alexander of imposing Serbian dominance. Slovenes demanded autonomy. In the shadows, radical groups plotted revenge. The king falls. On October 9, 1934, during a state visit to Marseille, France, King Alexander was assassinated. The killer was linked to the Croatian Ustaše, working with Macedonian revolutionaries. The bullets that struck Alexander didn't just kill a king. They killed the illusion that Yugoslavia could survive by force alone. After his death, the throne passed to his 11-year-old son, Peter II, with a regency council led by Prince Paul. But the country remained fragile, a house divided as Europe slid toward war. The shadow of Hitler. By the late 1930s, the storm clouds of World War II loomed over Europe. Hitler had annexed Austria in 1938, placing Nazi Germany right on Yugoslavia's northern border. The world watched as Czechoslovakia fell, then Poland. Soon, German troops were in Hungary and Romania. Yugoslavia was surrounded. Inside the kingdom, political tensions grew sharper. Croats pushed for more independence. In 1939, the Yugoslav government signed an agreement giving Croatia significant autonomy, creating the Banovina of Croatia. To Croat nationalists, this was a step toward freedom. To Serbs, it was betrayal. Yugoslavia was a powder keg, and Hitler was holding the match. The Axis pressure. As the war raged across Europe, Hitler turned his attention to the Balkans. Italy had already invaded Albania and attacked Greece. Germany demanded that Yugoslavia join the Axis powers, a pact with Germany, Italy, and Japan. On March 25, 1941, under immense pressure, Prince Paul's government signed the tripartite pact, aligning Yugoslavia with the Axis. The nation trembled in outrage. To many Yugoslavs, this was treason, the coup, and Hitler's fury. Just 2 days later, on March 27, 1941, the people struck back. A military coup in Belgrade overthrew the regency. Young King Peter II was declared of age at just 17. Crowds filled the streets shouting, "Better war than pact." Yugoslavia had defied Hitler. But defiance came at a terrible price. Hitler, enraged by the coup, vowed to crush Yugoslavia. He delayed his invasion of the Soviet Union to punish the kingdom. The order was clear: destroy Yugoslavia as a state. On April 6, 1941, the Luftwaffe rained fire on Belgrade in a brutal bombing campaign. The sky turned black with smoke. Thousands died as German bombs tore the city apart. Within days, German tanks rolled across the borders from all directions. The Axis invasion was swift and merciless. In less than 2 weeks, Yugoslavia collapsed. But its story was far from over. The fall of the kingdom would ignite a new kind of war, a war fought in forests and mountains, a war of partisans and betrayal, a war that would drown the land in blood. And in this chaos, a name would rise, a name that would shape Yugoslavia's destiny for the next 4 decades. The German invasion of Yugoslavia in April 1941 was swift and brutal. In just 11 days, the kingdom collapsed. The dream of unity shattered as Axis forces carved Yugoslavia into pieces. The dismemberment of Yugoslavia. Germany, Italy, Hungary, and Bulgaria tore the country apart. Slovenia was divided between Germany and Italy. Croatia became a Nazi puppet state, the independent state of Croatia, ruled by the fascist Ustaše. Serbia fell under direct German military occupation. Bosnia was absorbed into the NDH. Macedonia went to Bulgaria, Montenegro to Italy. What had been a fragile kingdom was now a broken land, ruled by dictators and collaborations. The horror of Ustaše rule. Nowhere was the terror greater than in the Ustaše-controlled state of Croatia. This fascist regime, allied with Nazi Germany, launched a campaign of genocide against Serbs, Jews, and Roma. Concentration camps like Jasenovac became death factories. Men were butchered, women and children slaughtered. Historians estimate that hundreds of thousands of Serbs were murdered in one of the most horrific campaigns of ethnic cleansing in modern history. Hatred burned like wildfire. Neighbors turned on neighbors. The dream of unity was dead. The resistance awakens. But out of the ashes, a new force emerged, the Partisans. Led by a former Austro-Hungarian soldier named Josip Broz Tito, this communist-led movement vowed to fight the occupiers and free Yugoslavia. The Partisans were not the only resistance. There were also the Chetniks,
Serbian royalist guerrillas who claimed to fight for the king. At first, they battled the Axis, but soon civil war erupted between the Chetniks and the Partisans. Why? Because while the Partisans fought for a communist future and a unified Yugoslavia, the Chetniks dreamed of a greater Serbia. Instead of unity, Yugoslavia bled from within. War without mercy. The forests and mountains became a battlefield of shadows. Partisans struck German convoys, blew up railways, and ambushed patrols. German reprisals were savage. For every German soldier killed, entire villages were burned and civilians executed. But the Partisans grew stronger. They gained the support of peasants, then weapons from the Allies. By 1943, Tito's forces controlled vast areas of the countryside. Their resilience earned them global respect. Churchill called Tito a hero. Stalin sent aid. The Partisans became a real army, a state within a state. The fall of Belgrade. By 1944, the Axis grip was breaking. The Red Army advanced from the east and the Partisans pushed from within. In October, Belgrade was liberated. Nazi forces were driven out. The occupiers who once shattered Yugoslavia were now in retreat. But victory came at a price. Yugoslavia lay in ruins. Cities bombed, villages erased, millions dead. Hatreds had deepened beyond measure. Yet amid the wreckage, Tito had triumphed. The monarchy was gone. The dream of a unified Yugoslavia was reborn, not as a kingdom, but as a socialist federation. As the guns fell silent in 1945, Yugoslavia entered a new chapter, a chapter of hope, strength, and an iron hand. But as history would show, the seeds of its future collapse were already planted.
The guns of World War II fell silent in 1945. But in the Balkans, silence did not mean peace. From the ashes of war, a new Yugoslavia rose, a socialist federation under the leadership of one man, Josip Broz Tito. The monarchy was abolished. In its place stood the Federal People's Republic of Yugoslavia, later renamed the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. 6 republics, Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, and Macedonia were united under one red flag. Each republic had its own government, but power ultimately rested with Tito and the Communist Party. Unlike Stalin's iron grip in the Soviet Union, Tito promised something different, a federation where nations could coexist as equals. But promises alone could not erase the scars of war. Entire villages had been wiped out. Infrastructure lay in ruins. Millions were homeless. Yugoslavia faced the impossible task of rebuilding a shattered land. Tito versus Stalin, a bold defiance. At first, Tito aligned with the Soviet Union, but soon tensions boiled. Tito refused to become a puppet of Moscow. In 1948, he openly broke with Stalin, a move that shocked the communist world.
The break could have been Yugoslavia's death sentence. Instead, it became its strength. Isolated from the Eastern Bloc, Tito turned to the West for aid while maintaining a socialist system. This balancing act would define his rule. The non-aligned movement. Tito's greatest political triumph came in the 1960s. Alongside leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru of India and Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, he founded the Non-Aligned Movement, a coalition of nations refusing to take sides in the Cold War. Belgrade became a stage for global diplomacy. Yugoslavia, once a battlefield, was now a voice for peace. For a small Balkan state, it was an extraordinary rise to influence. Life under Tito. Economically, Tito introduced self-management socialism, a unique system giving workers control of factories. For decades, it seemed to work. Yugoslavia experienced steady growth. Roads were built, schools opened, healthcare improved. For ordinary citizens, life under Tito often felt freer than in other communist countries. People could travel abroad. Western music and fashion found their way into Yugoslav cities. But this prosperity came at a price: foreign loans. By the 1970s, debt was piling up, a time bomb ticking beneath the surface. The illusion of unity. On the surface, Tito's Yugoslavia looked stable, even modern. But deep inside, old ghosts stirred. Ethnic divisions never disappeared. They were only suppressed by Tito's iron will. His charisma held the federation together like glue. But what happens when the glue is gone? In May 1980, the inevitable came. Tito died. The man who had kept Yugoslavia united for 35 years was gone. Across the federation, tears flowed. Crowds lined the streets to bid farewell to their leader. The world watched as one of the largest state funerals in history unfolded. Kings, presidents, and dictators stood side by side to honor Tito. But behind the mourning lay a chilling question. Without Tito, who would hold Yugoslavia together? The answer would come in blood.
When Tito died in May 1980, an entire nation mourned. But beneath the sorrow lay fear. Fear that without the strong hand of their leader, Yugoslavia would crumble. For 35 years, Tito had been the glue that held 6 republics and 2 autonomous provinces together. Now, that glue was gone, and the cracks began to widen. The economic storm. By the early 1980s, Yugoslavia was drowning in debt. The loans that once fueled prosperity now strangled the economy. Inflation soared, unemployment spread, factories closed. Young people who once dreamed of a better life now faced empty pockets and empty promises. Discontent simmered, and in that heat, old fires of nationalism began to burn. Nationalism rises from the ashes.
Without Tito, the collective presidency, a rotating leadership of republic representatives, proved weak and divided. Each republic began looking inward, fighting for its own interests. Then came voices of power, loud, fierce, and dangerous. In Serbia, one man rose above the rest, Slobodan Milosevic. A former communist turned nationalist, he promised to make Serbia strong again. His fiery speeches stirred Serbian pride and Serbian fear of being dominated by others. In Croatia, Franjo Tudman spoke of independence. In Slovenia, calls for separation grew louder. The fragile federation was splitting apart. The breakup begins. In 1991, Slovenia and Croatia declared independence. Yugoslavia was breaking, but Serbia, under Milosevic, refused to let go, especially in regions where Serbs lived. War erupted. The Yugoslav Wars. The conflict began in Slovenia, a brief 10-day war, but in Croatia it turned into a nightmare. Cities like Vukovar were reduced to rubble. Neighbors became enemies. Then came Bosnia, a land of mixed peoples, Bosniaks, Croats, Serbs. In 1992, Bosnia declared independence. The response was brutal. Serb forces backed by Belgrade launched a campaign of ethnic cleansing. Villages burned, civilians slaughtered. The world watched in horror as Sarajevo endured the longest siege in modern history, nearly 4 years of shelling, snipers, and starvation. And then there was Srebrenica. In July 1995, over 8,000 Bosniak men and boys were massacred in what would be called the worst atrocity in Europe since World War II. The dream of Yugoslavia was not just dead, it was buried under mountains of corpses. The endgame, Kosovo and NATO bombing. Even after the Bosnian War ended in 1995, violence continued. In Kosovo, ethnic Albanians demanded independence from Serbia. Milosevic responded with force, brutal force. By 1999, NATO intervened. For 78 days, bombs fell on Belgrade. Bridges collapsed, power plants exploded. Serbia, once the heart of Yugoslavia, was left in ruins. In 2001, the last sparks of war flickered out in Macedonia. By then, Yugoslavia was gone, dismembered into 7 nations: Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, and later Kosovo. The price of division. The cost: over 130,000 lives lost, millions displaced, entire cities destroyed. From a dream of unity came a decade of blood and ashes. Closing reflection. From its birth in the aftermath of World War I, through its fiery resistance in World War II, its bold independence under Tito, to its violent end in the 1990s, Yugoslavia's story is a tragedy of ambition and identity. It was a nation that dared to dream, and a dream that turned into a nightmare. This was Empires Unearthed. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you found this story powerful, subscribe for more untold histories of nations that rose, ruled, and fell.